Oda's foreshadowing is legendary. He seeded Robin's loneliness long before Eni's lobby. He turned Luffy's rubber body into power-ups that felt obvious only in hindsight, and he uses cover stories, throwaway lines, silhouettes, and family names like loaded weapons. Most fans accept at this point that the man is thinking 15 steps ahead at all times. But there's a specific category of foreshadowing that operates differently. Hints that split the community's opinion and looked like one thing for years, sometimes for over a decade, before Oda finally showed his hand. So today we're going through 5 of the most controversial foreshadowings in One Piece history. We're looking at what the canon actually shows, what was confirmed through the manga or directly by Oda, and in a couple of cases, what's still sitting there like a loaded gun, waiting to go off. Let's start with one that took 14 years to resolve. If you've been reading One Piece since the early 2000s, you know that the cover stories are their own separate beast. Oda uses them to advance side plots, flesh out characters the main story has moved past, and occasionally plant something that won't pay off for an absurd amount of time. The cover story From the Decks of the World, which ran through various chapters during the time skip era, is a perfect example. It showed what familiar characters were doing, while Luffy trained on Risukaina. Most of it was straightforward, but Chapter 631, released in 2011, showed something that immediately set off alarm bells. There's Crocus, the old lighthouse keeper and doctor of the Roger Pirates, and he's sharing drinks with a mysterious figure. Long hair, conical hat, cape. The visitor is shown from behind, and Oda deliberately keeps the identity ambiguous. That's it. No name, no dialogue, just 2 figures, one of whom we know, one of whom we don't. The community lost its mind in a very specific way. In 2011, the anime had just popularized Shiki the Golden Lion through the non-canon film Strong World. His design, the long hair, the flamboyant clothing, matched the silhouette closely enough that a significant portion of the fandom became convinced this was a rare canonical cameo for the film's villain. Others pointed to the conical Casa hat and argued this was a Wano samurai making an early appearance, which would have been extraordinary foreshadowing given that Wano wasn't properly introduced for another several years. And a smaller group, noting the Roger Pirates connection, argued it had to be Scopp Gaban, one of the most mysterious top officers of the Roger crew, a man mentioned briefly but never properly shown. The debate ran for 14 years. 14. That's not a typo. In 2025, Chapter 1139 finally resolved it. The chapter notes explicitly confirm that Scopp Gaban appears in the present day, and that he is the man who visited Crocus in that cover story. The Crocus character page corroborates this, noting that after the time skip, he was visited by his former Roger Pirates crewmate, Scopp Gaban. The smallest faction had been right all along. But if the Crocus cover story was a slow burn, the next one was an explosion. And unlike Scopp Gaban, this one didn't just create a debate about identity, it created a debate about the entire character of one of the most important figures in the series. Chapter 907, released in 2018, shows what appears to be Shanks, red hair, familiar silhouette, gaining a private audience with the 5 elders at Marijua. He walks right into the seat of world government power and requests to speak with them about a certain pirate. The anime would later portray this scene with Shanks' actual voice actor, deepening the apparent confirmation. The community reaction was immediate and fractured. Shanks had always been positioned as something like the moral North Star of One Piece. He gave Luffy his hat. He lost his arm for a child he'd just met. He's the emperor the story treats with the most dignity, the most mystery, the most sense of hidden purpose. And now, here he was, seemingly walking into a cozy private meeting with the people running the most oppressive institution in the world. Rat Shanks became the nickname. Half the community decided this was confirmation that Shanks had been playing a longer game all along, that his honourable pirate image was a carefully constructed facade, and that he had some kind of secret arrangement or even membership with the world government. The theories went everywhere. Maybe he was secretly a celestial dragon. Maybe he was feeding the 5 elders information about other pirates. Maybe his whole relationship with Luffy was designed to cultivate a specific kind of power that served some hidden agenda. The other half pushed back hard. Shanks' track record across the entire series didn't support a secret villain reading. The scene was deliberately ambiguous. The fact that it looked like Shanks was precisely why it might not be Shanks. They were right, but it took the final saga to prove it. Oda introduced Figalan Shamrock, a world noble, a commander of the God's Knights, and the elder twin brother of Shanks. They share almost identical physical features. Shamrock's character page confirms that he looks down on Shanks for abandoning the celestial dragons, and that during the Leveille, he disguised himself and met with the five elders to discuss a certain pirate. The anime, lacking this information at the time of its adaptation, had portrayed the visitor as Shanks. Once Shamrock was revealed, the entire scene recontextualized perfectly. Shanks' integrity as a character was never in question. What Oda had done was use the near-identical physical resemblance between two estranged brothers to make the audience question everything they knew about one of the story's most beloved figures. The misdirection was masterful because it used something structurally real. Twins with identical appearances do create genuine confusion, and deployed it at exactly the moment when it would create maximum narrative damage. Shanks' reputation survived. The theory community's nerves did not. Now here's the one that I think might actually be the most underrated of the bunch, because unlike the others, the controversy wasn't about identity or allegiance, it was about whether this thing even counted as foreshadowing at all. After the Skypiea arc concluded, Oda began running a cover story series called Enel's Great Space Operations. Over several covers, it depicted Enel, the defeated villain of the Skypiea arc, making his way to the moon, discovering an ancient civilization, awakening dormant mechanical beings called automata, and fighting a group of space pirates. The cover story summary confirms that Enel's lightning powers activate the automata's ancient city, and that murals on the moon reveal that the Skypeans, Shandians, and Burkans originally came from the moon and migrated to the blue planet when its resources were exhausted. At the time, a significant portion of the fandom treated this as comedy filler. Enel was already a defeated villain. Space pirates. The moon. It felt like Oda letting himself have fun between arcs, like a Saturday morning cartoon interlude between serious story beats. Because these events appeared only in cover art rather than in dialogue or the main narrative, some fans concluded it was non-canon, or at least irrelevant to anything the main story cared about. But now look at where we are in the final saga. The Egghead arc introduces the Mother Flame, a vastly powerful energy source connected to ancient technology, predating the world government by centuries. The Void Century's civilizations were clearly capable of constructing machines and weapons of extraordinary complexity. The concept of ancient automata, self-replicating or power-activated mechanical beings from a lost civilization, lands very differently after Egghead than it did in 2005. And then there are the winged races. The cover story confirms Shandians and Burkans share a lunar origin. They are literally people whose ancestors came from the moon. This connects directly to the Lunarians, the ancient race linked to the sun god Nika, and opens questions about what else exists on the moon that could bear on the Void Century's secrets. Oda has not revisited Enel's lunar expedition in the main story as of current chapters, so the full significance remains unconfirmed. But the cover story is treated as canon, and the thematic connections to the final saga's central mysteries are too precise to be coincidence. The automata, the ancient civilization, the moon as a repository of Void Century knowledge, these aren't comedy filler anymore. They look, in retrospect, like Oda quietly sketching the outline of the world's real history, while everyone was laughing at Enel discovering space pirates. There's a type of foreshadowing that's even more maddening than the kind that gets resolved incorrectly. It's the kind that still hasn't been resolved at all, where the clue has been sitting there for over a decade, expanding in possible implications with every new arc, and the answer is still somewhere ahead of us. Chapter 761, the Dressrosa arc. Don Quixote do Flamingo, mid-fight with Trafalgar Law, reveals that he holds leverage over the entire world government through a piece of information he alone possesses. Specifically, he knows about a national treasure hidden within Pangaea Castle at Marijua. He tells Law that if he had obtained the Ope Ope no Mi's immortality surgery, he could have used this treasure to take over the world. The Marijua character page reiterates this. A national treasure exists in Pangaea Castle, and Doflamingo claimed it could shake the foundations of everything. He never describes what it is. The community has been theorizing for over 10 years. The most popular candidate, and frankly the one that lines up most cleanly with later canon, is the enormous straw hat that appears in a freezing vault beneath Marijua, a hat described as being roughly the size of Emu himself, stored in a cold room deep within the castle's most secure areas. Crocus. Many fans connected this directly to Joy Boy, arguing that the straw hat is either his literal hat or some kind of ancient relic tied to his identity and promise. Others propose that the treasure isn't an object at all, that it's information, the truth of the Void Century, Joy Boy's actual history, something that, if made public, would delegitimize the world government entirely by revealing what they erased and why. Given that the world government's entire authority is built on a historical narrative they control, a document or proof that contradicts that narrative would be precisely the kind of thing Doflamingo could use as blackmail. Some theories connected the immortality angle directly to Emu, suggesting the treasure requires the Ope Ope no Mi's eternal youth surgery to fully utilize, which would explain both why Doflamingo wanted the fruit so badly and why Emu has apparently survived for centuries in perfect condition. As of the most recent chapters, the national treasure's true nature has not been confirmed in the manga. What the final saga has done is deepen the stakes. Emu's behavior around certain historical information, particularly anything connected to Joy Boy, suggests that the treasure is intimately tied to whatever it is Emu is protecting. Doflamingo's foreshadowing remains live. It hasn't been diffused. Whatever is in that vault, the world government is willing to do extraordinary things to keep it there. Now we arrive at the one that, in my opinion, represents Oda's most patient and most consequential piece of foreshadowing in the entire series. Not the most controversial debate-wise, but the most structurally important, and the reveal that most fundamentally recontextualizes something the community had long considered a closed chapter. Chapter 1084 and the Alabasta Arc. Most fans, when they thought about the Alabasta Arc after its conclusion, thought of it as a complete story. Vivi was the heart of it, a princess who worked with the Straw Hats, chose her people over her crew, and returned home. Beautiful arc, great character, done. Oda had been thinking about Alabasta's role in the world's history for the entire time. Chapter 1084 reveals that during the Void Century, the Alabasta Kingdom was ruled by a woman named Nefetari D. Lily. She was one of the 20 monarchs who came together to found the world government, but unlike the other 19, she refused to become a world noble. She refused to place her weapon at the empty throne. She chose to go home to her people instead of ascending to the most powerful governing class in the world. She also vanished before she ever made it home. Her fate became one of history's mysteries, and she carried the D initial, Nefetari D. Lily. The implications of this are enormous. The will of D, the mysterious inherited will that connects Luffy, Roger, Ace, Law, Teach, and others, has been one of the series' central mysteries since early in the story. And now, suddenly, we know that a D carrier was present at the founding of the world government, and that she was the one person among the founders who walked away. A letter she left instructs her descendants to protect the poneglyphs and to bear what she calls the Flag of Dawn. What Oda had quietly placed in the Alabasta arc, years before this revelation, was a kingdom with an unusually deep relationship with history. Alabasta had a poneglyph. Cobra had knowledge passed down through generations that hinted at something larger. The alliance with the Straw Hats never felt entirely coincidental, but no one suspected that the reason Alabasta mattered was because its founding queen had been the one dissenting voice at the creation of the world government, a D who chose humanity over power and paid for it with her disappearance. The canonical consequences unfolded immediately. In chapter 1085, King Cobra, Vivi's father, reads Lily's letter aloud at Marijua. Emu, upon realizing that Lily's name contained the D initial, becomes enraged. Cobra is killed. Vivi, now knowing the truth, is forced to flee Marijua with her life. The Vivi character page confirms that after the Leveille, she became a direct target of Emu and the 5 elders, who forced her to go into hiding. Vivi is no longer a former crew member who chose a different path. She is the heir to a bloodline that challenged the world government at its inception, a D who carries, whether she knows it yet or not, the same inherited will that connects every other D in the story. The whole of the Alabasta arc, her entire character journey, retroactively becomes the setup for this. When Oda first wrote Alabasta, was he thinking about Nefetari D. Lily? Did he know in 1999 that the princess at the centre of that arc would eventually become one of the most important figures in the series' endgame? Oda's track record suggests that at least the outline was there. The D has always mattered. The connection between Alabasta's poneglyph and the broader history was always intentional. The specifics may have sharpened over time, but the bones were in place. Here's what all 5 of these have in common. In every every case, Oda was working with information the reader didn't have and wouldn't have for years. He wasn't just planting clues for attentive readers to find, he was constructing false impressions, deliberate visual misdirects, and strategic silences, knowing that the community would fill those silences with its own theories, and that some of those theories would be right, and some would be catastrophically wrong, and that either way, the eventual resolution would hit harder because of the years spent in uncertainty. The Crocus cover asked you to guess a face you couldn't see for 13 years. The Shamrock chapter asked you to question the honour of a man who'd never given you reason to. Enel's Moon cover asked you to decide whether to take it seriously at all, and most people decided not to. Doflamingo's Treasure is still asking you, what in the world could possibly shake the foundations of everything? And Alabaster asked you, retroactively, whether you'd really understood that story at all. The thing I keep coming back to is how many hints we're probably dismissing right now. How many cover stories are we reading as jokes? How many throwaway lines in the current arcs are going to look, in 10 years, like exactly the kind of thing we should have taken more seriously? If Oda can take a panel of two figures sharing a drink and keep that ambiguity alive for over a decade, what else is he sitting on? The final saga is moving fast. The pieces are coming together. But given this track record, I'd be very careful about anything that currently looks finished, or harmless, or too small to matter. With Oda, those are exactly the things you should be watching most closely. As always, thank you for watching, and have a nice one.